Ghost and Me podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Ghost and Me podcast. Cody, how are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing pretty good, Bob. I appreciate you asking. It's been a fairly interesting day. I don't know if you saw the video clip I sent you earlier.
Yeah, I've got to ask you, what is going on in Wichita, Cody?
Dude, I don't know. I think it's fentanyl or something, man, but that lady was she was pretty far gone. And what's crazy is when the light snapped to, her passenger like woke her up, and then she went into a conversation like nothing had happened.
Dude, were bath salts a problem for you guys over in Wichita at all?
I'm sure we had a few incidents, but not like any like major ones that I can recall off the top of my head.
So I vaguely remember this happening in Sydney, the town that I grew up in, Sydney, Ohio. And there was a point where someone did bath salts and they either attacked someone at the gas station or they drove their car into the gas station. Both of those things happened. I just don't remember which one was because of the bath salts.
Dude, bath salts are crazy, man.
Yeah, what's really crazy is I went over to the vape store to get some juice head pouches, not sponsored, but we should be.
That would be amazing.
They're selling like what I thought was like Galaxy gas, but it's not. It's like flavored nitrous. Have you seen this?
I thought that's what Galaxy gas was.
Oh, it might be. I've only ever
I've
heard
never
of Galaxy
partaken.
gas
I would have no idea. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, I've only ever heard of Galaxy gas like through TikTok, so I have no idea. But it had like,
Dude, 100%. It's like some Zoomer whippets.
yeah, well, that's exactly what the guy said it was. And then he was like, they had flavors like blueberry melon and like apple custard, and I'm like, this is next level. Just huff some glue like an adult.
Yeah, just huff some paint thinner like a man.
Dude, there was a guy I went to school with, and has nothing to do with the episode, but a kid I went to school with caught himself on fire huffing gasoline.
No shit.
Yeah, by far the craziest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I wasn't there, but I like stayed at his house and we were playing, I think it was Tony Hawk's Underground 1.
That was a banger game.
And he's like, I have to go downstairs. And then he came back up like super embarrassed. I'm like, well, what happened? And he explains to me how he caught himself on fire huffing gasoline, and his mom had to like clean the wound for like several months.
Holy shit,
after this
dude.
happened.
That's awful.
Yeah, but kind of going back to Sydney, Ohio a little bit here. Shout out to Terry from Cleanall. So I don't know that you've heard this story, Cody, but what got my interest in the black-eyed children in the first place? And I might botch this story. I know I've told this on a couple different podcasts, but one day I was listening to Coast to Coast. Shout out to Art Bell, R.I.P., the absolute goat. And there was a cleaner that came down every day. His name was Terry. And this guy was usually very soft-spoken, didn't really have a whole lot to say. You know, one of those kind of guys who really just did his job and went home. I think he had like 5 jobs. Like this dude literally would like call off one job to go work another job.
That's wild.
One of those kind of guys.
He was dedicated to the craft.
Yeah. And one day he comes down and he says, you know, you shouldn't be listening to those radio shows. And I was like, why is that? And he's like, you know, that stuff's real. And again, this is like pre-podcast, pre-investigations, apart from like the ghost hunts of my youth. Like this was pretty out of left field. And it was one of the like first times I got to know that, okay, people have stories about the paranormal. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure, man.
And he says, you know, those black-eyed chitlins, you don't mess around with them. And I was like,
wait, did you say black-eyed children's or chitlins?
He said chitlins. And I said, huh? I said, Terry, what? And he goes, you know, those are real. You don't mess around with them black-eyed children's out here. And I was like, hang on a second. What do you know about the black-eyed children, Terry? Explain this to me.
Dude, I'm dying because that reminds me of the ostrich emu guy.
Oh, one day I'll tell the ostrich emu story. Anyone out in the hills of Illinois, if you find an ostrich and an emu running together, you saw what you thought you saw. But I'm sitting there and I'm talking with Terry and he's like, yeah. And I don't remember, and people have to forgive me because it's been, you know, probably 7-8 years at this point, if not longer than that, actually. And the long story short is this cleaning guy who had nothing to do with the paranormal, no interest at all in the study, the field, whatever we want to discuss or call it today. Mm-hmm. And he's adamant that he had a run-in with the black-eyed children. They came to his door. And I want to say, and I could be confusing this thing, and I do apologize to Terry if you happen to be listening to this, but it was basically they knocked on his door, asked to use the phone, and they were like, adamant consistently, can I come in? Can we come in? Why can't we come in and wait to use the phone?
That's so bizarre. It's almost as if they need to be invited in.
Yeah, so what we're going to dive into today, I know you're not super familiar with the Black Eyed Children. Have you ever read any of these stories? Do you know what they are?
Yeah, so I've read a few of the stories. I haven't really fully delved into the phenomena itself, but based off of the stories that I have read, on Reddit and other various places, I've had a few submitted to me as well over the last couple years.
Yeah.
Is that essentially they need to be invited in, or they seem to have an overwhelming need not only for a permission to come inside, but they also have some sort of a, I don't know, like they cast like a hypnotic glare on people. I don't know if that
Yeah.
makes sense or not.
No, it does. And for the audience, Cody pretty much hit it on the head. What these things are is they are these allegedly supernatural, otherworldly beings. And we're going to explore a kind of unique aspect of them today. We're going to kind of dive into what they are, where the history comes from. And then I want to dive into a pretty unique take on them. But back to Terry, again, this guy, very much, no nonsense kind of guy. I want to say he had like 5 or 6 kids. He constantly working. He provided for his wife. She didn't work, and he had to make sure the household was taken care of. So this guy was not someone that you would really expect to be playing a prank or whatever.
Like he seemed like a really serious guy.
Yeah, yeah. And what's really strange is the episode I was listening to of Coast to Coast wasn't. It was about a UFO case in like Utah.
Hmm.
It had nothing to do with the Black Eyed Children. So it's like, well, what made him bring up Black Eyed Children? Is he familiar with Coast to Coast? And so I asked him, I said, do you listen to a lot of George Norrie? Do you listen to a lot of Coast to Coast? And he's like, no. But a couple times I've come in because I worked night shift. Again, this is years ago when I worked night shift at doing security. And he kind of came up and he's like, I've heard you listen to the ghost stuff every now and then, but I just want you to know, like, some of that stuff is real. And the Black Eyed Children, they're real. And I could tell, like, he had the big eyes, very serious, like, dad, you're in trouble look.
Oh my
of like,
God.
don't mess around with these things.
I mean, it sounds like the dude was pretty well convinced of his experiences.
Yeah, and like I said, he definitely told me he had an experience, and then I want to say some months later he came back and said that either his cousin or his aunt, someone in his family saw them as well, like 3 towns up in the middle of frickin' nowhere. And you've been around these areas, Cody, like some of these rural Ohio areas, like it's middle of nowhere. There is no
No, it's
civilization.
desolate. It's straight desolate. I mean, it's almost kind of like how it is here in Kansas.
Yeah.
Just very much open, like farmland or woodland, depending on where you're at. And yeah, if I saw a group of kids in the middle of the night or early morning, what have you, out in the middle of nowhere in desolate Ohio, which of course it's in Ohio. I mean, I'm sure that's happened in more places
Yeah.
than just Ohio, but for the sake of the story, I'd be a little concerned for sure.
Yeah, and that's kind of where my brain was as well when he told me this story. I was like, what are you talking about? Okay. So again, I did no research at this point in time. And then fast forward half a decade, if not more later, I ended up getting a comment on my YouTube channel over at Tales from the Dark just saying, hey, will you cover the Black Eyed Children? So of course, the memories of Terry and the Black Eyed Chitlins, it all kind of came flooding back to me of like, what are these things? And what was interesting is I'm pretty sure in the video I came to the resolution that these were all a made up urban legend, which was very strange because I had known someone who had a firsthand encounter. Well,
Right.
and again, this has been some years ago that I covered this story. Well, since then, there's been dozens, if not more, books written, so much AI generated content, which we're going to kind of discuss AI generated content a lot over this podcast and how it's kind of infiltrating the paranormal, for lack of a better term here.
It's flooding the market essentially.
Yeah, and I'm not even talking just the AI generated YouTube channels, but the actual stories that are now being mixed in with fact is extremely, it's a cause for concern because one of these things I've noticed were a ton of these AI generated voices over on TikTok telling Black Eyed Children's stories. And it's like, well, it makes doing research extremely difficult on these topics to figure out where these things even come from if there's so much nonsense out there.
Right. I absolutely get what you mean. And that's with a lot of topics in general, but particularly recently, I've also noticed it with the paranormal. trying to stay in tune with the community and what have you. Yeah, it's effectively flooding the research market as well as the entertainment market because, I mean, if you're trying to decipher fact from fiction, to try and pull the most credible stories you can. I mean, some of these AI stories, man, they're pretty good. You know what I mean? They can be fairly convincing.
Yeah. Well, and that's the problem is like we were already in a very fringe and niche topic of entertainment and conversation. So it's extremely hard for us to get to the bottom of these stories as is and try and vet out, like you said, the more credible stories. Because again, the term credible and then the term paranormal, they don't really go together very well as is.
Right. To try and further solidify the credibility, this just muddies the waters for sure.
Yeah. So okay, well, let's dive into the black-eyed children here a bit, so I don't get off I'll get on my soapbox too hard about AI and the paranormal. Today, there are literally dozens of cases on file concerning black-eyed children. However, the most important one of all is, of course, the first case, or at least the first reported case. It comes from a man named Brian Bethel, a respected journalist whose story first began to circulate in the late 1990s. Now, I do want to point out just quickly for the listeners here, this has been heavily scrutinized, but similar to our conversations we had with Alan, is a hoax actually a hoax if it still generates a real report later down the line?
Right. Does it, in a sense, kind of become a tulpa in and of itself, like a manifestation of the phenomena or what we would consider the phenomena?
Exactly. As fate would have it, and on the night in question, Bethel of Abilene, Texas, realized he had forgotten to pay a bill, and so he got in his vehicle with the intent of depositing the check in an after-hours drop box. Cody, do you remember after-hours drop boxes? Those I don't think those exist anymore.
Are you talking about like for like rental videos or mail?
No, like utility bills and stuff.
Oh, no. Oh, I vaguely remember them as a kid. I don't think we have those really anymore. I know some banks have them for like deposits and stuff, but
Yeah, the utility like warehouse in my hometown had one, and it was always a rush for people to get there by a certain time, or else they wouldn't collect them, and then your like utilities would be shut off the next day.
that's fucking crazy.
Yeah, so
That's
it was
that's
coming up.
rough.
It was coming up to 10 p.m. when Bethel arrived at the location, which was situated in a shopping mall. As Bethel sat in his vehicle writing out the check, he was interrupted in a terrifying style by a loud tapping on the driver's window. I also remember checks. I don't know that people even still write checks anymore.
You can for certain things. But I know that most major places don't accept them. Now, I don't know about like high-end boutiques, sort of a thing.
Yeah.
I doubt that they do, but unless you were like a vetted person or something like that. But I know like most grocery stores and stuff don't. You can still at some gas stations, surprisingly, which is wild to me.
Dude, my hometown grocery store, Sydney Food Town, used to put up pictures and names of people who like wrote bad checks to them when I was a kid and saying, don't take checks from this person.
Oh, dude, yeah. At the old Dillons we used to have actually here in Derby. I say here in it's over by me in a sense, but not to dox myself
Yeah.
fully. But that Dillon's no longer exists. But they used to do the same thing, like behind the finance counter. They would put like they had like a whole like a cork billboard, and they would like tack up people's photos and shit and their bad checks.
See, I love that so much. There's a place here in town that rents out porta potties, and they have like one of those giant, super bright LED signs, and they put up like Cody Richardson, $600 past due on porta potty rental, and they just like are doxing these people, and then also putting them on blast for being late to paying for their porta potty. And that's my favorite like bit of passive aggressive business I've seen probably in the past 5 years.
Jesus, that's hilarious.
Okay, so anyway, as he quickly looked up, Bethel was confronted by a pair of young boys who at first glance in the darkness and in the shadows appeared normal. Matters very quickly became deeply strange, however. In no time at all, Bethel developed a disturbing sense that was not at all well. It was as if a malignant atmosphere had suddenly descended and blanketed his vehicle. And as if out of nowhere, So this part. It's always interesting in this story, because in the Mothman prophecies and also in the Eighth Tower, John Keel references these like areas of great fear and how seemingly it's a normal, area. Like I think he described it as a area out in the TNT area, or in the road surrounding the
Hmm.
TNT area surrounding Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where he would be driving and then suddenly just intense fear for seemingly no reason at all. Just like, and then he would, there was a couple times where he actually like forced himself out of the car, forced himself to walk through these areas. Then as soon as he would pass, everything would go back to normal. Like no fear, no nothing. It was like,
Dude, that's so ballsy. I would consider that like a sense of impending doom.
yeah,
I used to experience that actually on occasion, in Sedgwick, where I described my dogman encounter last time,
yeah,
where I, semi grew up, like halfway grew up. And actually so where our road was, where I was kind of describing where that quarry was at across the street from us and down to the left a little bit.
yeah, yeah,
So that road itself kind of like looped around and it went all the way down to the school. Like, cause the school, like complex, like the high school and elementary school and all that was all in one area. And I used to walk to and from school, as I got older, if my mom couldn't take me or whatever. And there were many a times I'd be walking and out of nowhere, dude, I would just get this crippling like fear of impending something and just anxiety and fear out of nowhere, especially when I would walk that bend that went over kind of by where the quarry was.
yeah.
And I always wondered, was that my own brain playing tricks on me or was it something else?
See, and that's the fun question of, because as human beings, we are kind of wired with that, not only fight or flight, but we're also wired with that sense of being watched. That's a very real phenomenon, like where you can tell when someone's staring at you. Um,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
but it makes me, I've been very interested in wanting to know, like, are we also kind of like pre-designed, I guess for lack of a better term here, with the ability to kind of know when high strangeness is afoot, and the chemical reaction in our brain is that of crippling fear.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept to explore kind of on its own, really.
Yeah,
Is there chemical changes that take place in the brain when encountering something like high strangeness, that induces this type of fear state?
yeah, no, I completely agree. And now I did just pick up a book called The Science of the Paranormal. I've been looking for a copy of it for a hot minute. I know they delve into a sort of study around this, but not fully. So in the next couple episodes, we'll dive into that a bit more as well, because it's something I've thought of for a long time. Of like, ghost hunters have described a feeling of like the atmospheric change, which is why some ghost hunters, like the guys over at Haunted Discoveries, they're doing things like measuring barometric pressure changes, and they're able to use that data to coincide with paranormal happenings during their investigation. So I do wonder, because your body can feel a barometric pressure change before we cognitively realize it.
Oh,
Is
definitely.
is it that far off to know that we know that an event is about to happen?
See that again, that's incredibly fascinating. And it is cool that, they're, that Haunted Discoveries, as well as I'm sure a few other teams are probably utilizing some of that newer technology to be able to measure changes in barometric pressure. And I'm sure like temperature changes and what have you. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, no, I mean, I would describe it, as such because you can walk into a building or any environment really and feel like a smothering presence, or if you feel like a sense of fear or anxiety out of nowhere. Like I've always wondered, like there has to be something more to that, and it can't just be my brain playing tricks on me because I could have been completely fine, 5 minutes before I walk into an area and I'm just like, oh, I shouldn't be here.
yeah. Now the skeptics out there will just describe that as the fear of the unknown, which does exist. I'm not at all saying that the fear of the unknown is not a real thing, but I will say that in these types of cases, like we're about to dive back into this case, I don't know that that really explains it. I don't think we can do an all encompassing fear of the unknown explanation.
Well, and I would also argue too, the more that you go to unknown places or delve into creepy, supposedly haunted places and topics, um, you get more or less desensitized.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that it's not possible to still experience, a fear of the unknown or what have you, or even if you suffer from anxiety to have some kind of an anxiety attack or episode. But to me, there's got to be something else to it. Not with every instance, but in certain instances, I think there's got to be more to it for sure.
No, absolutely. So Bethel was careful to only wind the window down to a small degree and asked the boys what they wanted. They came up with a story that sounded most unlikely and left Bethel feeling uneasy and frightened. They claimed to need a ride back home so that they could get some money and then go see a movie. "Come on, mister, let us in. We can't get in your car until you do, said one. It was at this point that Bethel finally saw the eyes of the pair. They were completely black with no iris or pupil anywhere in sight. Bethel knew exactly what he had to do. He hit the accelerator and was gone, and so were the black-eyed children. As Bethel looked back, they had seemingly vanished, and impossibly quickly, too. So, this is one of the few stories of the paranormal. The reason that this stuck out to me is almost seeming real is that is the most real reaction that you could have in that instance of just, hey, I'm not dealing with this. I'm leaving. I'm leaving these children without eyes on the side of the road.
Yeah, just gun it. Get out of there.
Now, the right thing to do would have been to throw it in reverse and just, let's test how ethereal they really are as beings.
Let's see if they're too ethereal to scream.
I mean, look, my thing is I do not believe in harming children. Ghost children, we might be able to make a good argument here for hitting them with cars. That's all I'm saying. But also,
I mean, you're not wrong though. That's definitely got to be a legal gray area.
Yeah, but also don't take this as legal advice. Do not sue the Ghost of Me podcast because you hit your neighbor child with your car because you thought he was a ghost.
Yeah, no, we do not condone running children over, ghosts or otherwise. This is all speculative and for entertainment purposes only.
Yeah, but if you are 100% certain that it is a ghost, maybe hit him with your car. I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm not saying that you'll definitely get in trouble for hitting a ghost with your car.
I'm not saying that it wouldn't be a 10 out of 10 use of free will.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
I'm just saying.
So experiences like that of Brian Bethel abound. In 2011, I investigated a case of a woman. Now, this is not me. This is an article that's written. I did not investigate this case. But of a woman named Allison who had a very similar experience in the previous year of 2010 at an Orange County, California motel. It was around 11 p.m. when a loud knock at the door made Allison practically jump out of her skin, as at the time she was laid out on the bed engrossed in a movie. Rather weirdly, the movie was Roman Polanski's 1967 movie Rosemary's Baby, which tells the story of a woman who gives birth to a demonic baby. Allison tentatively got up and tiptoed to the door, peering through the spy hole. She could see two young boys, both in black hoodies, standing right in front of the door. This reminds me, I don't know if you've, I hate to keep jumping off the story here, but if you've dove too deep into the paranormal happenings surrounding the original Exorcist movie, not on the set, but of people watching The Exorcist.
Oh, dude, it's creepy. I have told this story actually a few times on my channel, but when I was actually doing a video way back when, before I was ever doing Mystery Archives full time, I covered a video where I went over all of the various terrifying paranormal manifestations that took place, not only on the sets themselves, but also with various screenings of the movie and some of the actors and what have you that were involved with the film. But I actually had a paranormal experience while I was editing that video in my house. And it was the only time I've ever had anything like that happen. And it was bizarre. I'll let you say what you were going to say, and then I'll explain what I mean by weird paranormal experience.
Yeah, well, the point I was making is during the screening of The Exorcist, which again, we have to remember, this is not a time that movies like Hostel and Saw and stuff had desensitized the masses from horror.
Right.
When the Exorcist dropped, I mean, that was next level terror that the majority of people had never seen before. Again, I want to say this is even primary satanic panic, where no one really knew how terrifying that this movie was going to be.
It's
And
still
there
a
was
fucking scary movie, dude.
Oh, absolutely. But there was an alarming amount of people after the fact who went home and within the next 30 to 60 days were going to their churches. There was a mass exodus of people leaving like Baptist churches, going to Catholicism
Yeah.
to go to the priest and to have these conversations of like, hey, my house is haunted. I need a blessing. I need to know what to do. I need a rosary. It was a weird phenomenon that followed that movie. And the reason that I bring it up is, naturally she's watching Rosemary's Baby. Something weird happens.
Mhm.
But a friend of mine has a podcast where they review like bizarre parallels in the, various paranormal movies and the like.
Right.
And what they do is they'll attach things like the Kabbalion and explain things like, the magical side of these things. But when they were recording that episode, both of them had random power outages on different parts of the country. They had weird static come through that sounded like a voice that they put up in the episode.
What?
And after the fact, they both had doors open, doors slammed, the whole nine. Now, their podcast, like I said, it's primarily like an esoteric, magical based podcast,
Right.
not around the paranormal. So they had their encounter, and then you have your encounter you're about to share.
Mhm.
Again, is this a shared thing? Is this proof of the theory that we cause hauntings with our mind? Are we all, are we going? Do we want to go as deep as the collective consciousness theory of enough people were afraid of this one thing that just by discussing it, you're inviting it into your home?
Right. Or did it tap into something darker? I mean, I know that you don't personally believe in demons, but I do. But it could very well be some sort of magical manifestation in one way or another.
Exactly. And I'm here for it. These are the conversations that I really want to dive into on The Ghost and Me, is the more fringe theories. I mean, that, and then the other one that comes to mind is like, is Bigfoot just the ghost of a Neanderthalic man? Like, we don't know. Let's talk about
Oh,
it.
dude, that's such a good theory.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Now you're talking about the experience that you had while doing the video for that about The Exorcist.
Yeah, no, man, you're totally fine. I'm still learning cadences and trying to get everything down pat myself, really. But so, long story short, I was editing the video, and where my setup was at the time was actually over slightly a little further than where I'm at just now. Where it's kind of like my kitchen area where I had my computer set up, and it was the middle of the day. It was like, I want to say probably like between 1 and 4 p.m. So like there was plenty of sunlight out. Um, that'll be important here in a second, but I heard this loud popping noise, and it was enough to make me be like, what the hell was that? Because I thought it's one of those popping sounds where it sounds like the power's going to go out, or like a transformer blew or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I looked up and I was like, what the hell? And I was looking through my window in my kitchen at my neighbor's house, trying to figure out, like, did something happen with their power? Like, I still have power, I don't know what's going on. And I looked in my screen, like my monitor of my computer, and in the left-hand corner, I saw some kind of a figure. And what makes this really creepy is that my dog would stare off into this corner of my house like on a regular basis. I'm sure Meg's told you, or we've mentioned it, I'm sure multiple times, like the corner by our front door where Luna would stare off into.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where this figure was. And I'm not a super religious guy. I would consider myself fairly spiritual, but I don't really follow any one said belief system. I was raised Catholic,
Mhm.
so in a certain sense, I guess that is ingrained in me. But that was the first and only time I think I've ever like verbally prayed out loud, because a sense of fear, the likes of which I've rarely experienced, gripped me. And I remember praying out loud, and dude, I was too scared to look into the corner. I'm gonna be real with you. I was way too fucking scared to look into the corner. I just had been looking into my monitor, and I closed my eyes. I started praying out loud, and then I like looked up again, and it was gone. And it never happened before, like while I was covering a topic, because
Yeah.
I often get asked, do you experience any additional stuff for, whilst delving into these darker elements of the world or what
Yeah.
have you. And I don't usually, because I usually take it from a very scholarly approach. I try not to get too physically or like mentally or spiritually invested, if that makes sense. But that was an experience, and it just happened to deal with the creepy, like haunted shit that happened surrounding The Exorcist. I don't know if you know this or not, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly certain the original screening is not the same film, the same cut of the film that actually ended up being released later, like on VHS and what have you, later DVDs. So a lot of people often wonder if that first cut, like there was something attached to that particular version of the movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not 100%. I feel like I have read that same thing, but did you know, before we get back into Black Eyed Children, you've seen Wayne's World, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So in the scene, this has nothing to do with anything apart from it's a funny movie fact. In the scene that they are in it's like a guitar center, it's a music store, and he's trying to buy I think it's a 65 and a half Fender Strat, if I remember correctly.
Nice.
And there's a sign that says "No Stairway to Heaven" on the wall. Do you remember that scene where they're like, "No stairway denied"?
Huh. No, I don't, because I haven't seen it in so long, dude. I got to be real with you.
Yeah, I was obsessed with it as a kid. But anyway, for listeners who know that scene, up until recently, the guitar riff he starts to play is not Stairway to Heaven, but if you watch his hands, it is Stairway to Heaven. Well, the band wanted a ludicrous amount of money for like a 4-second, I think it was like less than 7 notes worth of the intro. They wanted like $100,000 or something crazy.
That is nuts.
So, yeah, so they changed it from the theatrical cut until just now when it's back on HBO. They have now fixed it to actually match the original audio. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, it took like 30 years.
Yeah, I was not aware of that. There's a lot of little nuances with stuff like that.
Yeah.
Before we get off fully off the topic of the Exorcist film, did you know that there was a serial killer that was one of the actors in The Exorcist? That's just one of the many scary things surrounding it.
Yeah, I did know that. I think we're overdue at this point for like a parafilm theory episode.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to lie. I would love to delve back into that and hopefully not summon any more creepy, weird entity figures in the corner in which my dog stares off into often.
Well, speak for yourself.
I know you would love it, but you don't live in my house, brother.
Look, I'm on any given day, I'm on the cusp of taking 19 Benadryl and fighting the Hat Man. So like, I'm here.
Oh my God, not the 19 Benadryl.
Look.
Sorry, but again, I think that's a rabbit hole we could go down for freaking an hour plus. So I'll let you get back to these black-eyed children, my man.
Okay. So as if realizing that Allison was silently and worriedly watching them, one of the boys leaned into the spy hole and said, "Please let us in. We need to use the telephone." Not only did the request send shivers throughout Allison's, but the fact that the boy was deliberately keeping his face pointed downwards while looming into view, and his eyes in shadow, only added to the menace. Then, something very disturbing happened. Allison felt as if an evil force was taking her own self-will and was trying to make her to open the door to her late-night callers of the sinister kind.
Ooh.
It took a supreme effort on Allison's part not to unlock and open the door. Fortunately, she was able to fight off what became, she said, a need to let the children in. Having regained her wits and sense of self-preservation, Allison looked again through the spy hole, only to see the boy staring right at her through a pair of solid black eyes. She screamed, jumped back, and called the late-night manager, who was on the scene in no time at all, but the black-eyed children were nowhere in sight.
I would yeet that black-eyed child.
Yeah, at some point, you just got to attack them.
You just gotta preemptively just swing on them.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Cody. What do you know about the Men in Black?
The Men in Black. I mean, there's a lot of different theories. That they're essentially oppressive government agents that try to silence any sort of high strangeness, but they're particularly tied to UFOs. To try, I mean, it depends again on your theories on them, but the main theory is that they're, again, government agents trying to smother or keep quiet anyone who's supposedly experienced extraterrestrial life or encounters, I should say.
Yeah, so the Men in Black for me, there's one story that always comes. Do you know who Mary Hyre was by chance?
Not off the top of my head. I did do a Men in Black episode way back when, actually before I did the Exorcist episode. I know that there's some really weird descriptions of the Men in Black. Like some people described them as looking plastic or like
Yeah.
uncanny valley. But no, I can't recall particularly her name off the top of my head.
So Mary Hyre wrote for a newspaper. I want to say it was the Athens Messenger, Athens Reporter, Athens something. It was definitely was in Athens. And she was right there on the border of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, Gallipolis, Ohio, during the Silver Bridge collapse. Now, everyone
wild.
went to Mary Hyre, like in this town for small town gossip, for everything. Like, her paper was kind of like the local, star when it came to basically anything to do with the area. Now, and when I say, I don't mean like UFO reports and Bigfoot and Mothman. I mean, like, it was like a legitimate, well-respected newspaper. But what Mary Hyre would often do is include these nice little subsections, usually around the middle. I have a few of the original newspapers somewhere in storage, but she would include like local UFO reports or like strange happenings on the Ohio River, which, as we all know, the Ohio River Valley is just a prime location for high strangeness.
A breeding ground.
Now, the reason I bring up Mary Hyre is there was a time, I want to say this is right after the Silver Bridge collapse. I'm not positive. It might have been right before. It was in that time frame, though, where she was having these two strange men. Now, these Men in Black of these 60s and 70s, very different than what we heard described in the early 2000s and even the mid 90s of these guys would come and they would have very strange clothing on. They would always be driving a brand new looking car, like it looked like it just driven off the assembly line.
Right, but it's like a vintage car. Like it was like older, like from the 50s.
Yeah, it would always be 10 or 15 years older. And these men came in and just asked Mary Hyre, what would you do if you were asked to stop reporting on UFOs? And, Mary Hyre, being a badass, which she was like, I would tell you to get lost. I write about what I want to write about.
Right.
Now, she had several of these encounters, and this kind of set off this chain reaction. And I'll explain how the Black-Eyed Children and Men in Black kind of combine here shortly. But she had it set off this weird chain reaction of people that even the contactees of the Mothman, they were having Men in Black encounters. Now, some of these Men in Black were described as like, there was one gentleman that comes to mind specifically. This guy was extremely tall. He walked very stiff, almost like he had like either a bad knee or a false limb. But one of the children noticed he had this weird wire that was like, it came up out of his sock and ran all the way up his leg. And he had to take these strange pills. And during this time, this gentleman showed up, and I'm going to butcher this story, and I do apologize. But he shows up to the house and he says, I am trying to contact, I'll just use your name. He shows up, says, I'm trying to contact Cody Richardson, but I'm not sure if you're the right Cody Richardson. The person I'm trying to contact, he had a family member die and leave a considerable sum of money. Now,
a Nigerian prince.
but kind of, put yourself in their shoes, extremely poor part of rural West Virginia. The idea of someone leaving you a large sum of money in this time is, it's enough for most people to say, okay, well, come in and tell me who you're looking for. Let's see if I am this Cody Richardson.
Right.
The family invites him in, gets a full family history. And at one point he says, oh, have you had any contact with any men of the sky? And they're like, what? Yeah, actually. And they tell the whole story. Well, of course, once this information goes out, he gets up and leaves. You're not who I'm looking for. Leaves. They never see him again.
That's so weird.
And the weird thing about the Men in Black in a lot of these instances is you're equally, it's down the middle between some of them like, hey, stop discussing these stories. Stop discussing UFOs. Stop looking into high strangeness. While others are gathering information. So my question is always, are these two, if we're looking at them, let's look at them as sects of the government here.
Mhm.
Is it an FBI CIA situation where this group is here to gather, this group is here to silence? Are they different entities and beings entirely? That's my question with the Men in Black.
I mean, that's definitely some very valid questions. Um, or is it some kind of psyop operation, where it's supposed to sow some kind of discord in order to create enough fear to silence people from talking about things. But it is really interesting because I hadn't heard of any Men in Black essentially gathering information. But I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense, really.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you a copy of both the Mothman prophecies and the Eighth Tower.
Oh, dude, I need to read them. I am behind on my lore.
Yeah, and I want to put this out for all of the listeners here. If you guys have watched the crappy Richard Gere Mothman prophecies, that has nothing to do with what really happened. And the actual book, The Mothman Prophecies, written by John Keel, is less of a linear story. It's not your hero's journey. It's not, Cody goes to the grocery store, fights a bunch of monsters, and come home. It's much more of, this is an entire collection of the UFO flap of 67 through 69 and the Ohio River Valley. And I don't even say Point Pleasant. You'll notice that's a big thing.
Mhm.
People associate Mothman strictly with Point Pleasant. Well, Mothman is this being from a million other places.
Yeah, so Mothman has definitely been seen in a lot of other places other than Point Pleasant. I know, for example, the Black Bird of Chernobyl is often associated with the Mothman. It's like is the Mothman, and again, this is a whole other rabbit hole that we could go down, but the Mothman is more or less seen as some kind of harbinger of doom. And I mean, I guess Chernobyl would be a pretty solid example of terrible things that could go awry, as was the Silver Bridge as well in Point Pleasant. But again, there's been a few other places where Mothman has been seen, but definitely it's made most famous by Point Pleasant.
No, absolutely. And whenever we do our Mothman episode, we'll dive into the harbinger of doom moniker that Mothman has adopted, and we'll kind of explain why that's not really true. It's just bad press.
Mothman just gets a bad rap.
Yeah, no, I mean his PR team is not very good.
Man, I do have to say, we'll have to get into exploring the TNT area and the domes as well.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of my favorite places in the entire world to go, and I have so many stories from out there.
Dude, it's a spooky place, man.
Okay, but before we go, I was interconnecting the black-eyed children and the Men in Black. So kind of getting back on that. There can be very few people within the field of the paranormal research who have not heard of the black-eyed children, but the Men in Black parallels might be new to some. In the same way that the Men in Black wear black suits and black fedoras, the black-eyed children often wear black hoodies. So we have a black outfit. We have a black outfit and black headgear present in both phenomena. Both the MIB and the black-eyed children very often surface late at night. Trying to convince people to let them into their homes is one of the most chilling aspects of the activities of both the Men in Black and the black-eyed children, and they're very good, almost too good at making their escape. But certainly, no one has done more to highlight the MIB BEC connections and parallels than David Weatherly, whose 2012 book, The Black-Eyed Children, is essential reading in the topic. All of which brings me to my new Men in Black book. This is an excerpt from an article that they did. David very generously penned a paper for the book titled Children of the Men in Black. Running to 18 pages, the paper makes it very clear that there are more BEC and MIB links than many people might imagine. David states in his paper, on the surface there may seem to be very few connections between the UFO-connected Men in Black and the creepy little kids with black eyes showing up on doorsteps. But when we delve into the actual accounts, we find numerous similarities, consider the appearance of both beings. David makes a good point on this matter. The black-eyed kids are usually described as having pale or pasty skin. Some witnesses report that the skin looks artificial. Still, other accounts claim that these children have olive-toned skin that implies they are of Mediterranean origin. So this is a very common thing that came up in old UFO books, and this is not proper. But if you dive back into UFO writings of the 60s and early 70s, You'll consistently hear researchers describe these beings, Indrid Cold being one, as quote unquote oriental in skin tone. Now, again, not proper terminology at all. Don't say that. But you'll hear that as you dive deeper into these very bizarre accounts and encounters with these beings.
It's really interesting. I wonder if they're just from the future, bro.
Yeah.
Or an alternate timeline or something.
Yeah. Okay, so both these descriptions are heard in classic MIB encounters. Oddly, no one has ever encountered the BEKs report a blemish of any kind. Bear in mind, these children are usually in their preteen years. One would expect acne, pimples, freckles, something, but it's never the case. David continues. Next, the manner of speech. The black-eyed children are reported to speak in a very monotone manner. Their use of language is often awkward and unusual. They will use phrases that simply aren't natural, such as, "Is it food time?" Perhaps even more troubling, many people who encounter the black-eyed kids believe that the children are attempting to exert some type of mind control through the use of repeated phrases in their cold, monotone speech patterns. Typical MIB encounters certainly contain elements of attempted coercion by the strange gentlemen, as witnesses of UFO sightings are encouraged to ignore what they saw. Are the attempts of the children another form of the same control dynamic? There then is something that is reported very often in MIB situations: electronic interference, and particularly so, problems with phones. David makes it abundantly clear that this is related to the black-eyed children too. The following is another extract from his paper. While I received a few minor reports, such as things like this when doing research, it was only after the publication of my book, The Black-Eyed Children, that things really got interesting. The first indications came in the aftermath of the book's release. Appearing on various radio shows and podcasts to discuss the topic, some odd things began to occur. I found that I could talk about a wide range of paranormal topics, but when discussion turned to the black-eyed children, things changed. Electronic issues would suddenly plague the program. Strange sounds and static would interrupt the show. Calls would be dropped, and weird clicking noises would come from nowhere. Appearing on Dreamland with Whitley Schreiber, technical issues started right from the beginning. Twice we were disconnected after strange sounds on the line. This could easily be dismissed, but the problems didn't end there. The volume levels of the show were all over the place as Whitley recorded. He also said, "I've never seen this happen," as he attempted to correct the issues in the studio. I'll note here that Whitley and I discussed the MIB and the BEK. In fact, on this particular show, Whitley revealed for the first time that he himself had a black-eyed children encounter. David concludes, whatever they are, the black-eyed children don't appear to be going anywhere, and they are leaving as many questions in their wake as the MIB before them. Whether the two are connected or not, it looks like we're in for more bizarre manifestations ahead. So pay attention. The next time there's a knock at your door, there's no telling what kind of strange figure might be calling. What are your thoughts on that, Cody?
Well, it's definitely a very interesting manifestation of some kind of phenomenon. And if, I mean, considering I have like a Ring camera, if a black-eyed child shows up at my door, I'm not letting them in. But B, I'll have some video evidence of their of their existence.
How do you know it's not Meg?
I don't. That, I mean, I'm assuming if it's small and it's outside, then it's clearly a black-eyed child and she can't come inside.
I'm just saying, at some point, like I've seen, 4 a.m. Megan in black hoodies that I do a double take, like, hey, is that a black-eyed child?
Dude, I'm not. Or a floating head or the ghost of a Victorian child.
She haunts our houses with her whiteness. And understand that this is not more than a joke. Megan is translucent somehow. I don't understand how she glows in the dark the way that she does.
Dude, you can see practically every vein on Meg. And especially like at your place, man, where you see her like sit up on the couch and there's just a little floating head.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times that scared the absolute shit out of me.
Now, one interesting thing I wanted to point out is we kind of go back to our conversation with Alan about the phenomenon kind of adapting with the times and changing with modern times. I mean, again, back in the 80s and 90s, a lot of people, we were a very naive country. I would say Dahmer was kind of the turning point for a lot of people to not trust people.
Dude, Dahmer was crazy.
Yeah, I would say, well, I guess we can go back further to the Summer of Love with Manson if we want to be really specific. But,
Yeah, true.
you're a lot less likely now to have an adult male come into your house and like question you. But
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, you also have to look too at like, people aren't out hitchhiking and that sort of a thing anymore. We definitely don't trust each other like we used to.
no, so it would not be that big of a stretch that the phenomenon would in turn adapt to children. Because even in 2025, like people are very hesitant to turn away a child in need.
Oh yeah, of course. Because I mean, in most instances, I mean, assuming they're not a black-eyed child, kids are. I don't know. Maybe it taps into whatever paternal instincts we could have lurking within ourselves. But I mean, they're also very much non-threatening most of the time. I would say. So there's something inside us that makes us want to help them.
Yeah, and it's one of those that you kind of want to dive into the psychological aspect of this stuff, which is something that I don't feel is done enough in just the study of high strangeness. Is this thing, this phenomenon, the greater collective consciousness, however we want to describe it, on this episode, if it is learning and growing, if it is interconnected with our own psyche, it's going to know the best way to kind of it's going to know how to mask itself in a way to get through to the most amount of people. And it reminds me a lot, and this is actually kind of ties into how familiar are you with Stephen King's It, like the book?
I read it when I was in high school, so it's definitely been a while. But I do remember there being some pretty fucked up parts.
Yeah, it's definitely not like I go back and now and read. But the one aspect of Pennywise I always admired is he kind of is the ultimate horror villain. Because apart from the obvious, he's a clown. People don't really tend to like clowns very much. But
yeah, no, I definitely don't. Not gonna lie.
But one thing he was able to do is kind of infiltrate each child's psyche and figure out what they're afraid of individually, and then they would exhilarate
and then like manifest that fear.
Yeah, exactly. So again, what if the phenomenon is doing that just on the other end of the spectrum of, hey, we're trying to get invited in. Clearly these 6'2" white males are not it anymore. What if we flip the script entirely and it's just helpless children? Like anyone's going to help a child except for me. If a kid shows up on my doorstep, I'm probably going to kick you across the street.
You just Sparta kick it right out of your doorway,
yeah,
real or not.
You show up to my house selling Girl Scout cookies and it's after dark, it's over.
Or ethereal or physical.
I don't know. This has always been an interesting topic with me because I want to reach out to a lot of these people who claim that they have these encounters, but again, it's getting harder with AI to know what's a real encounter and what's not. Because I would love to know, did they have encounters of any other sort? Whether that be paranormal, did they see a Bigfoot? Have they seen any strange lights in the sky? And if so, how soon after that encounter did this happen?
Right. I would ask you this as well. If the phenomena, for lack of a better terminology, if it is going this route where it's trying to essentially gain entry into one's life to manifest, so to speak, my question is, why is it manifesting in such a way and what does it have to gain? Is it feeding on people's fear? Is it charging itself like a battery? Or what is its, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a tough one because we kind of go back to stories, of vampires of yesteryear of the same way. They had to be invited in. They were always, they're much older from a different time. So they're speaking with a very strange dialect. They don't quite fit in. And again, like these stories have to come from somewhere. Everywhere has a grain of truth to it. I mean, we know.
Right, for sure.
Vlad the Impaler had a lot to do with the modern vampire stories. Whether people want to acknowledge that or not, history tells us a very different story.
No, absolutely.
So, but again, it begs to wonder, like, where do these stories initially come from? And that's why I've always loved history as much as I do, because a lot of times, fact is much stranger than fiction. And
Yeah, it really is, man. I mean, and speaking of vampires, I covered a vampire story a year or two ago. I've only done, I believe, just the one on my channel there on Mystery Archives, where it was the monster of Medveda. I believe that was in Serbia. I don't remember all of the ins and outs, but it was pretty interesting because there was an apparent plague of vampirism. And there's whole it's a whole historical dig into that story in and of itself. But like you said, these stories have to come from somewhere. It's just a matter of where, for one, and two, what really happened.
Yeah. Now, was it you or was it What Lurks Beneath that covered the Crogland Grange vampire?
Oh yeah, I guess. Well, that channel may have also covered it, but I did also cover the Crogland Grange. I almost forgot about that. So I guess I've done a few vampire stories now.
Yeah, well, the reason I bring up Crogland Grange is that's another one that when you dive deeper in the story, they reported strange echoes from the graveyard, apparitions, lights in the sky, fairy lights that seem to dance in the woods behind Crogland Grange.
Well, and this the description of the Crogland Grange vampire too is terrifying, but I get what you mean. These things could very well be connected.
Yeah, but to kind of answer your question on what does it want, I mean that's the ultimate question, right? And it goes back to, does it only exist because folks like us acknowledge that it does exist? And that's the hardest question to answer, because again, we see this in religion as well. Like, you have to invite God into your heart to be saved. The phenomenon's not that different. And again, I know I always lose some listeners when I bring up religion, but I do have to make sure that it's known that we do see these parallels throughout all religions, and then now showing up in high strangeness related fields. And not even, we can ignore Kabbalistic ritualism and esotericism and all the words of old when it comes to magic. And you can't really write off some of these strange lights in the sky. I mean, look at the Saul of Taurus, for example. I mean, if you were to tell the Saul of Taurus in 2025, his entire story, it would read like a modern day UFO contactee sighting. So what I love to do is look back on some of these old stories from the Bible, and I can speak on this to an extent. I am an ordained minister. Like, I have done my research. When you look at the Bible through the scope of a paranormal investigator, you're like, holy crap. If this happened in modern times, we'd either think that they're schizophrenic, which paranoid schizophrenics have a weird overlap when it comes to high strangeness.
They certainly do. And religious delusion as well. Sadly.
Yeah. But my point being that you will start to see things to a different light entirely if you just open your mindset of just, this is not a biblical story. And again, I know we can have the conversation and the argument of these are all just old pagan rituals that have been misinterpreted throughout the years, the sacred mushroom, holy cross. I'm well versed in those, but in this particular argument, view biblical stories through a paranormal lens, and you're going to start to see a pattern emerge of, these times of old, these lights in the sky that came and they changed an entire life, an entire purpose in someone's soul.
Right. I mean, Jesus ascending into the sky. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of different references to, I mean, not only miracles, of course, but, things to do with, obviously there's supernatural elements, no doubt, but there do certainly seem to be some kind of UFO connection there as well. Or there seems to be, rather.
Absolutely. Well, as we end this episode, Cody, let me ask you, what would you do if you're taking Luna out, you come back inside, and in between the door and you're outside, you have a black-eyed child between the door and the house. What are you going to do? I mean, because Luna's probably going to try and make it her friend, because Luna's special.
Luna is incredibly special. That's a great question. Well, first of all, I would die for that dog. As special as she is the specialist. If there was any first of all, you're not coming in my home uninvited, period. But if there was any sense of malice, you're straight up getting 300 Spartan kicked right in the chest.
And we have to keep Meg away from the black-eyed children, because if not, you definitely have a new roommate.
Dude, 1000%. She'd be like, oh my God, my new friend. And I'm like, absolutely not, ma'am. That is not happening.
Yeah, one day we'll have Meg on the show and we can dive into the amount of Estes methods and just strange times. Bob, can we go talk to my friend tonight?
Dude,
Who?
no kidding though. And I love Meg so much, but I feel like her survival instincts in that regard. Like, I mean, if we could take it back to even like Roy's place, you know what I mean? It's like, I didn't feel like it was that evil. And I'm like, nah, dude, whatever that was straight like malicious.
Yeah. Well, but again, we talk about paranormal negatives all the time. Maybe Meg is a paranormal positive. When she's around, the ghosts are just like, you know what? How much evil could really be in this 14-pound person?
This 14-pound person, this just literal floating head.
All right. Well, with that being said, Cody, I think this is a great episode. If you guys want us to cover more niche paranormal stories like this, let us know. I've got a couple poltergeist stories I want to dive into. I know Popper's at the top of that list. I know, Cody, you covered Popper not too long ago.
Yeah, I think it's been about pretty close to a year ago now. But yeah, we delved into Popper the poltergeist. That was a pretty interesting one for sure.
Okay. Well, time is an illusion. I thought this was like 3 months ago.
Oh, no, this would have been, well, it may have been a little less than a year, but I feel like it was like March, like February, March time that I did Popper. I'd have to look, but I'm pretty certain.
Okay. Well, time is an illusion. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for joining us this evening. Let us know what you think about this episode. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review over on Spotify and Apple. It helps us out more than you guys know. If you're on Apple, write a review. We love to read them. We love to react to them.
It really does help so much.
Absolutely. Again, thank you guys so much and have a good night.
Yep. Take it easy, guys.